Okay, we're live.
All right, good morning and welcome to the House Environment Committee. This morning, we are welcoming Carla Raimundi from the Environmental Justice and Civil Rights Office.
Yes, at the Agency of Natural Resources. Thank you very much. As Representative Sheldon said, my name is Carla Raimundi, and I am the Director of Civil Rights and Environmental Justice for the Agency of Natural Resources. First of all, thank you very much, Chair Sheldon, Vice Chair Labor, and Ranking Member Larry Satkovitz, and members of the House Committee on Natural Resources, Fish and Wildlife for having me here today with you all. I was asked to provide an overview of the Vermont Environmental Justice Law and answer to the best of my ability, I'll try to do that, how the federal actions may impact the implementation of such law, and additionally to provide an update on the implementation of the Vermont Environmental Justice Law. So those are the three parts to my testimony today. If there are any questions at any moment, please let me know. I would like this to be a conversation more than anything else, and I want to ensure that we are having the conversation in a way that is supportive of your understanding and knowledge of this really impactful work. Okay, so we're gonna start first with the introduction of the EJ law, then we'll do an update, and last, the question regarding federal actions and the impact on the EJ law. So the Law Act 154 was enacted in 2022, and its core objective is to identify, reduce, and eliminate environmental health disparities to improve the health and well-being of all Vermont residents. From this declaration, the law builds a cohesive structure to allow for the implementation of such goal. To build consensus across agencies and communities, the Act created a section on definitions. And some of the definitions, the most important definitions for our conversation today are environmental benefits, and these are positive outcomes of environmental actions. Environmental burdens, these are adverse factors from agencies' actions or natural causes. Environmental justice, there's a definition for environmental justice, and I invite you all to check the statute. It is a very comprehensive definition, but suffice it to say that this is the principle that no group should bear a disproportionate share of environmental burdens or be denied equal access to benefits. Environmental justice-focused population this is a term of art that the law created, and this is how the law refers to those overburdened populations here in Vermont, overburdened, historically marginalized, or linguistically isolated communities. Then the Vermont Environmental Justice Law codifies the state policy, transforming those terms into requirements. And the policy basically states that no community may experience unequal burdens or exclusion from benefits, and that all residents, especially environmental justice-focused populations, must have meaningful access and opportunities to participate in decisions that affect their lives. To provide independent oversight and coordination of the implementation of this law, the Act creates two bodies, the Advisory Council and the Interagency Committee. The Advisory Council is composed of 10 members. They're community-based representatives from underserved, historically marginalized communities, and the Executive Director of the Office of Racial Equity. That's the composition of the Advisory Council. And the law also created the Interagency Committee. And the Interagency Committee is composed of officials from 10 agencies. And the law refers to these agencies as the covered agencies. The Agency of Natural Resources is one of those covered agencies. We'll see that the Agency of Natural Resources, in addition to being a covered agency, is also tasked with providing technical support to both the Advisory Council and the Interagency Committee. So then we're wearing several hats. The Agency of Natural Resources is the provider of technical assistance, is also a covered agency, and that means that all of the mandates in the law, we need to ensure that as a covered agency, we are complying with and implementing. And then also we continue business as usual. We are a regulatory agency. But in the doing of the regulatory work of our agency, we must ensure that we are abiding and advancing the principles of the environmental justice law. Then the law moves to establishing specific deadlines and deliverables to translate that policy that we briefly discussed into action. And really briefly, so as to not bore you, because I could be talking about this for hours, I'm just going to mention several of the deliverables that the law created for the 10 covered agencies. Community engagement plans. All of the covered agencies, the 10 of them, must create a community engagement plan. And the law establishes that in order to do so, we must consult the Advisory Council and base those community engagement plans on the core principles of community engagement that were created under the auspice of this law. It was the first deliverable under the law, core principles of community engagement. Then there are a series of reportings that the law requires of the covered agencies. Agencies must submit annual reports that include environmental justice complaints and civil rights complaints, Title VI complaints filed against the agencies. That's one reporting that we must submit to the Advisory Council. And additionally, another reporting that we must ensure we comply with is submitting baseline spending reports and take action on a question of proportionality when it comes to distribution of expenditures. Then rulemaking. The Agency of Natural Resources is specifically tasked with issuing rulemaking on cumulative environmental burdens and how to use the environmental justice mapping tool, which is another deliverable under the law that the Agency of Natural Resources is specifically tasked with advancing. So I've already mentioned two particular deliverables that the Agency of Natural Resources is responsible for: rulemaking on cumulative burdens and the creation of the mapping tool, creation and maintenance of the mapping tool for Vermont. And the deliverable for that mapping tool, because I received several questions, is January 1, 2027. Okay, are there any questions about the EJ law itself and the structure that it stood up in order to advance the policy of the Act?
I guess I would just be curious about progress on the deliverables, where you're at.
Great question. So that's the second part, and we're gonna start there. Update on the implementation. Community engagement plans. This is very exciting, internally to the agency, but also to the interagency committees. All of the covered agencies need to create this community engagement plan that is founded on the core principles of community engagement that were created and centered around the Advisory Council. So we have this document that was actually created and centered around the needs and interests of Advisory Council members. The deadline for that is July 1, 2027. The plans, the law mentions that they need to describe how the agencies will engage with environmental justice focused populations as it evaluates new and existing activities. The community engagement plans need to align with the interests of the advisory council and will be also advised by the interagency committee. Each plan will describe how the agencies will provide meaningful participation in compliance with Title VI. Where are we with the deliverable? At the Agency of Natural Resources, this is 2027, but in order to create a good community engagement plan, we need a relatively long runway. So we created a task group. We will have the first meeting on Friday, that's tomorrow, with the task group. And the task group, internal to the agency, has representatives from all of the 3 departments and the secretary's office. The intention is that we will do an assessment of existing practices, bolster those practices, and ensure that in doing that, we are touching base constantly with the communities that we serve to advance the real needs. So we're not speculating about what works and what doesn't. So we will take the time to have conversations with communities who participate regularly in our regulatory processes and beyond. Another thing that I would like to say about the community engagement plans is that other agencies in the interagency committee have already started organizing around the creation of a community engagement plan. And internal to the Agency of Natural Resources, with the support of leadership, we created a network. We created 2 networks. One network for civil rights and one network for environmental justice. And those networks are composed of staff from the agency, frontline staff. And the idea is that these individuals communicate regularly with our unit, with the Civil Rights and Environmental Justice Unit, on both spaces, civil rights and EJ, so that we are understanding what things are coming up regarding these 2 spaces and how we can best address the needs. And this is the structure that we will be relying on to put together the Agency of Natural Resources Community Engagement Plan. Are there any questions with regards to the community engagement plan or comments?
Representative North.
Moving to the next.
Representative North has a question.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Representative North.
Maybe I should just let you continue and maybe it'll get answered. So just, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I would like to ask a question at some point.
Okay, fantastic. The next deliverable that I would like to offer an update on is the environmental benefit spending guide. This is a big one for the agency, and a very exciting one. So the deadline for this is September 15, 2025. So this is tomorrow, basically. But we've been working on this for several years now. And the Agency of Natural Resources is specially asked, in consultation with the IAC, with the Interagency Committee, and under the advisement of the Advisory Council, to develop a guidance, and this is the blurb, develop a guidance on how the covered agencies will determine which investments provide environmental benefits to environmental justice focused populations. That guidance is drafted, and the update here is that we are about to initiate a public comment period. It is statutory, 40 days. So that guidance, we've socialized it over and over with all of the interagency committee members. We hosted individual sessions with those agencies. We've consulted the advisory council, And the next step is that public comment process. And like I mentioned, this guidance is intended to communicate to the agencies how to track investments that provide benefits that flow to environmental justice focused populations. Okay, moving on. Yeah, questions?
No, I think we should keep going because
Fine.
the bell will start ringing and I want to make sure we hear what.
Mapping tool. The mapping tool is another important deliverable, as you may imagine. And where we're at is we are in the selection process of the GIS statement of work contractor. We published the statement of work in March. We received multiple proposals and we are in the process of reviewing the proposals. The process, in order to ensure fairness, we are doing a blind evaluation of the proposals. Then the next step in the conceptualization of this mapping tool is a community engagement request for proposal. So there are two components to the creation of this mapping tool for Vermont. One is the geographic component, and the other one is the community engagement component. In attention to how nuanced community engagement is, we have decided that we're going to pursue a contractor who specializes in community engagement to ensure that the technical creation is informed by the community engagement component. Those are the updates that I have. Something important to keep in consideration as we're having the conversation about the mapping tool is that at the federal level, the tools that we were relying on to make assessments regarding where to assign investments or how to create products that are dispositive of the needs on the ground, they disappeared. They're no longer available to the public. So it is more important now than ever that as we think about creating this mapping tool for the state, that we do that in a way that captures really what the needs are here in Vermont, and that we gather all of the information that we can to ensure that the data compilation and the indicators that we have really allow the agencies to assess where the most need is. And those are the updates. Are there any questions? I have a third section to the presentation, which is the federal actions question. And it's going to be really brief, but there are several things that I really would like to share.
There might be a question on the previous.
Yeah, maybe before we get
To
into
the
the
federal
next
actions,
topic, if-
yes.
Thank you, Chair. If I could, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
So, given the definition of what environmental justice is, that no group shall bear unfair burden or be denied access to the benefits of clean environment. I'm paraphrasing, but the key parts there were burden and access, right? Burden, unfair burden and access. So what metrics do you use to measure burden and access? I mean, I understand the basic, what those words mean, but how do you measure that? And then how will you know that when you're successful? What do those metrics have to achieve so that we know that we have relieved burden and we got access? What do you physically use to
Yeah.
measure?
This is a very important question, and I appreciate the opportunity to reflect on it. And the answer is the law identified tools that we will put in place in order to allow for those evaluations. One is the rulemaking on cumulative burdens. And in order to do that, we would have to engage in a really robust assessment across the state in partnership with the other agencies to identify burdens that are currently impacting certain populations. So that rulemaking will really allow us to develop the framework to answer the question about burdens. Then the next part of,
So just for 1 second there, so
yes,
we really don't know what the burdens are or even how to measure them. We're gonna go look and see if we can find some.
well, in discrete, for example, permitting process, there's usually an evaluation of impacts that occurs inherent to the process of approving a permit, for example. But structurally across the board, which I believe is your question, right? Structurally, how is the state of Vermont, the Agency of Natural Resources, and perhaps other agencies going to do this evaluation so that when decision-making occurs, we understand how our actions are impacting certain sectors of the community? We will have all of that information gathered as we start understanding better what kind of data we have. There is information that exists, of course, but the way in which agencies are utilizing that information really depends on each of the programs and the actions within the agency. So in terms of the structure and how we're moving forward, there's an opportunity to have an answer for that question that is inclusive of state actions from agencies at large. Bless you. And that will come as part of the exercise and foundation building that we need to do in order to issue that rulemaking. But right now, discreetly, the agencies should, depending on the programs, consider impacts. The question of cumulative burdens and distribution of that will come in a fashion that will become easier as we also stand up the mapping tool. Because the mapping tool, the way that we are envisioning and how other EJ tools operate is you identify the burdens, the indicators, those or indices, those attributes that we want to consider as agencies engage in decision-making. And then we will have a better way to capture where those are. An important consideration is that although we don't have access to the federal data, EJ Screen, CJ is the climate justice tool that the federal government stood up, but are no longer available, is that the data that was contained in those tools was really not accurate enough for Vermont for us to be able to make informed decisions. And so there are several consequences that come from that. For example, certain communities that are not captured by, for example, environmental justice screen of EPA, no longer available to the public, were not captured or identified by the tool because Vermont is very rural. We don't have a lot of volume density. And so some of those tools would not pick up the granularity that we very much desire to be able to make informed decisions. So the mapping tool for Vermont will really help us make those evaluations in a more granular way. I know this is a long answer to your question, but I just wanted to include the two components that the law actually created for us to be able to make those determinations into the future.
Thank you. That was really helpful. I think we already had a mapping tool that was derived from, or maybe it was entirely based on that federal data. Did we lose that also, or do we still have that? I mean, somewhere, do we have it? So I guess I'm wondering, were we drawing on it in real time, or had we kind of downloaded it and started using it separately?
We have the information.
Yeah. And so will that be the basis of our new tool? A starting place for it?
Well, we will definitely take that information into consideration, but I think this is really a question that I would want to discuss with the contractor regarding, because it was taken down in January and things fluctuate. And the reliability of the data, it's stagnant now. It's an assessment that I think we should make when the time comes, because the deadline for this mapping tool is several years down the line. So I anticipate that realities on the ground as climate evolve, circumstances occur, will change. And so, capturing those changes are going to be important, but we have access to the information. We did download that information. Now we are very careful to rely on that information when making decisions, because it's no longer a tool that's supported by the federal government. So although the data exists and we have access to it, utilizing it to rely on decision-making is not something that we're comfortable with right now.
One more follow-on question. So what is the annual budget for the Civil Rights and Environmental Justice Department, your department within ANR?
I wish I could say infinite. So our budget is the budget for the secretary's office. The unit sits within the secretary's office, and we do not necessarily have, like budgets associated with the divisions within the secretary's office. But I can get back to you with regards to the dollars that are currently used to support staff. Basically, is staff.
Does that include the investments money that we're looking to allocate? Mapping as well? It's not a different source. Or is that-
Well, oh, yes. So that is a good question. So the investments that the agencies would be assessing for are programmatic investments, are part of agency budget. My
So they're not part of agency, but they are.
They are,
They are.
yes, they are. So each of the programs have certain dollars that they allocate to provide certain products to Vermonters. And then in that allocation would be then subject to that evaluation of proportionality further down the line, right? So the first step is to identify which expenditures provide benefits to certain Vermonters, right? For example, like how many trees are planted. And so that has a dollar amount, and that is the investment that we would be taking into consideration. And then holistically, once we have captured investments providing environmental benefits flowing to certain communities, then taking, a big look at the comprehensive structure, we would then be able to say, oh, this investment is proportional, this is not, and then we would adjust the goals for investments. That's all in statute. And it is a lot of work. It is exciting work. It is important work. And I would say that more now than ever.
We probably.
Yeah, the advisory council receives per diems too, correct?
The advisory council receives per diem, and there, like I mentioned, there are 10 members of the advisory council, and then the executive director of the Office of Racial Equity. And then my unit within the Agency of Natural Resources has 2 staff environmental justice coordinators, and then myself. And between the 3 of us, we are, coordinating the implementation of this law.
Question.
Just real question. I'm just wondering, to get back to the data question, can you just aggregate the data, let's say by gender, ethnicity, race, economic, because it could be they're being discriminated because they're a woman, not because of their ethnicity, or it could be because they are poor. Or they could be poor and a woman and Hispanic. So I'm just wondering how you will just aggregate to really get to that they're being not accessed, that's not fair to them.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. Thank you very much. The EJ law defines environmental justice focused population utilizing 3 factors. The first factor is household income.
Mhm.
Linguistic isolation
Mhm.
is the second factor, and then race is the third factor. And that is the definition in statute. Now, that does not mean that those will be the only factors that we would consider when creating this tool. And another important thing is that things are changing, as you are very aware of, at the federal level. And guidance is changing with regards to what we track at the agency. And so we will see what happens with that information, but that is specifically to your question about demographics
Yep.
and women and
Different
Yes,
categories.
yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Do you have one more? I feel like we didn't get, did we get to?
Well, we didn't get to the part of the federal actions, but I think this conversation, the last part of the conversation touched on that. I can share my testimony, so
Great.
that you have access to that portion of the conversation. And if you have any questions, I am happy to answer them by email or come back here and enjoy your company right next to the cafeteria and this beautiful view.
Thank you so much for joining us.
A
It's-
pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Members, the S-124 is up first, so it would be good for all of us to be out there and support Kate. who's
And are we
representing
coming?
us.
For Michael, is he coming
It's going to come after the floor.
after the?
Immediately,
I know
come
you
out
said-
immediately after the floor back to committee for